COVID-19 has undeniably expedited innovation, and that is no more true than in the realm of telemedicine, as people were forced to stay home. However, stagnating telehealth stocks tell a different story, one that indicates that mass adoption might not be imminent. Well, why? John Nosta, World Health Organization tech expert, believes that in order for telemedicine to become the preferred experience, it needs to integrate dynamic aspects of technology. It can't simply be a copy and paste version of a doctor's office onto a computer screen. Watch our interview as we discuss the barriers and the benefits to an at-home medical model. All right, thanks for being here. I'm joined by John Nosta, innovation theorist, member of the Google Health Advisory Board, and WHO technology expert. Boy, oh boy, you must have a lot to think about these days as an innovation expert.
All I do is think, but it's fun.
All you do is think.
That's it.
You've recently written about the urgent need for telemedicine 2.0. Mm-hmm. I found this really intriguing, especially because when we look at psychedelic companies that are hoping to optimize telehealth, some doing well and some, facing some challenges. This idea of an urgent need to innovate in the realm of telemedicine is intriguing to many who come and visit the Dales Report. So tell us a little bit about where we are now that you're actually calling for the urgent need for change.
Well, I think there are a couple of key points. One is when I look at the data, when I look at actual telemedicine visits, and these are varied data sources, so there's not a definitive view, what I've been seeing is telemedicine is actually going down. So we saw a rapid rise during the COVID period, and now it's kind of coming back. And depending upon what data set you look at, some of these show that it's actually back to baseline of Q1 2020. So there's something going on here. Fundamentally, that's because telemedicine was a function of necessity and not need. We couldn't leave our house, so that's all we had. Now, the other side of the coin, which I think is really interesting, is that telemedicine is largely contrived. It's not a true office visit, but it's a cobbled together office visit using old school technology. Let me jump back and talk about that. And it's always good to quote Steve Jobs, because I think he did some interesting things in terms of changing the market. And Steve said that in the early days of television, all they did is take a radio show and put a TV camera in front of the program. So that, it's still a radio show. And I think that's what we did. We took an office visit and pushed it into a Zoom dynamic. So nothing changed. And the interesting thing for me, and this is really the reason why telemedicine 2.0 needs to be pushed forward, is that we're not leveraging technology to complete or create a more robust clinical visit. And it's my vision that telemedicine is not an afterthought, that it's not marginally as good as an office visit. I believe that telemedicine, by leveraging continuous contact dynamic of technology today, can actually become better than the office visit. We could have continuous care using devices, using an EKG machine or using a stethoscope. But now that stethoscope is no longer in the hands of the clinician, but in the hands of the patient. So my feeling is there's a tremendous opportunity of telemedicine, except what we've done is we've created no functional user experience, just like the old days of the web. We took
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say old days of the web, right? It was almost like putting a brochure online. And now the web experience has become more dynamic. And we're even seeing that with Web3, where it's more of an immersive experience. And so generally this idea of the same but better is the comfortable path to innovation and adoption. But you're suggesting that we need to think almost differently, not just better, but differently. And we need to make some sort of jump that we're just not seeing right now. So the incorporation of technology into the telemedicine visit is another essential element to making it mainstream. So do you have an example of that?
Well, let me back up and follow up on your thought. What we do today is we incorporate technology into medicine. right? We have an existing medical system and hierarchy, and then we try to push technology into it. Why can't we look at it completely the other way around? In other words, why can't we take medicine and incorporate it into technology? So to me, that's a really interesting fundamental shift, because medicine is old, medicine is broken, technology is new, technology offers us tremendous opportunities. So that's where I think we can make big changes. And with respect to examples, we go back to the idea of using a digital stethoscope. A digital stethoscope allows clinicians to actually record a heart sound. They can record that lub-dub. Now anyone who has had any clinical experience, we know that lub-dub, especially the very subtle ones, they're called 1/6 systolic ejection murmurs or S3 gallop sounds. Those are rumors. Those aren't heart sounds. Those are rumors. Few people hear them. The cardiologist comes in. She says she hears it and it magically appears in the chart. But that's not real science, you know? What we could do is record it and have a physical record. We actually look at the waveform of that sound. And that'll allow us to be much more accurate and much more specific. Now, when you add something called an EKG to that, what you do is you can create something called a systolic time interval. And what that does is it measures cardiac contractility. And we know one of the biggest areas for a lot of this technology is in congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure is very expensive. There are a lot of repeat admissions. People end up in the ER. But if we can take good care of them at home, leveraging telemedicine, we can optimize their care and we can save a lot of money. So in the final analysis, what happens is that stethoscope, and we all know what the stethoscope is for, Nicole. The stethoscope identifies the doctor. Right? That's the guy with the stethoscope around his neck, you know, like a prayer shawl. But what we've done is we've taken that stethoscope and we've transferred its clinical utility through technology, and it ends up in part in the hands of the patient, of that guy sitting on his couch watching the football game. So that's a classical example where telemedicine and telemedicine-like continuous monitoring can completely change the game.
But psychologically, there's an attachment to that stethoscope because that signifies a certain hierarchy.
No, completely.
And so if we're going to talk about the human elements of making this transition as well, what are some of the most powerful barriers to innovation? Because I have a feeling you're going to say that it has something to do with the position that the doctor holds in terms of a power structure, power dynamic.
It's not only a power dynamic, it's a linguistic dynamic. It's authoritative. When patients get into clinical trials, they are recruited. What the heck kind of a word is that? Be recruited? I don't want to go in the Army. Then they go into a clinical trial. Who wants to go on trial? I'm innocent. So the language is problematic. The clinical hierarchy, there's an actual pecking order from the medical student through the intern, through the attending, through the chief of medicine. And that's a hierarchy that's well established. That's the way physicians are taught today. So patients come to the physician. That's the dynamic. But here we have an opportunity to bring the clinician into your house. And that's a change. And in my experience, physicians are interested, perhaps a little reluctant for a variety of reasons, legal reasons, reimbursement reasons, all sorts of stuff. But once patients try telemedicine, they're very excited about it because they realize they can sit in their living room or sit on their bed and have a dynamic call and engagement with the clinician. So, I think that's a fundamental shift. The other side of the equation, Nicole, is that you have to ask yourself, who's the smartest person in the room? Right? And that's the doctor. We all know that. The doctor is the smartest person in the room. Well,
until the computer comes along.
Well, there you go. That's what's changing. The computer is the smartest person in the room. So that stethoscope worn reverently over the shoulders as a badge of honor, as a badge of intellect, is changing because the cognitive heavy lifting is being replaced by technology in the context of an office visit, but also in the context of telemedicine. And that puts the zap on clinicians' heads. We have to be, realistic about that. That changes the game and it frightens them. So it's an interesting but a scary time. And remember, all innovations carry with it the duality of wonder and fear. Wonder and fear, whether it's our first innovation, our first technology of fire, wonder, fear, burns our house down, cooks our dinner. The airplane, wonder and fear. It's cool, but I'm not getting in that thing. Now it's the safest form of transportation. Look at the driverless car.
One thing that you said that I really liked when you were talking about innovation, specifically adoption, just to go off the airline industry, but it took 67 years for the airline industry to reach 50 million customers. You said it took Facebook 3 years and Pokemon Go 19 days to reach the same level of adoption. What's it going to take for telemedicine? Well, because you're saying that we're actually regressing back to almost pre-COVID numbers in terms of adoption.
That's why I think that we're not offering the right tools. And we can't expect exponential change without exponential innovation, if you will. So using a Zoom call as the basis for telemedicine is not going to get us there. The other interesting thing about telemedicine in general is that it's not just one type of office visit. Psychotherapy is really interesting because it's not encumbered by technology. I'm not as concerned about your cardiac sounds. So there are opportunities for that to kind of move off an exponential path more quickly. Dermatology, where it's highly visual. So there are the curve will try to push along an exponential dynamic, but what's going to happen is it's not going to be the same curve for every clinical practice. And one other thing about that tricky exponential curve is that when we put these components in place, you know, when Elon Musk does his thing with the car or batteries or other technological innovations, the early part of that exponential curve, that swoop upward, the early part is sometimes below linear growth. So from a business perspective, my boss comes to me and says, you know what, if we did it the old-fashioned way, we would be better off today. So the early part of innovation can be worse than linear. And that's I call it the danger zone because we have to be careful. And we might see that in telemedicine. Telemedicine might get worse before it gets better, but that's the dynamics of that shift.
Right. So again, and when it comes to psychotherapy, even something as simple as that, where it seems like it would be intuitively transitioned over to Zoom and have the same impact, it might just stumble a little bit at the beginning before it finds its own way. So it's not just about the same but better, but it's different and better.
Yeah, and I think that one of the linchpins is trial. And we see that in any consumer dynamic. You know, you give away a free sample of a food product, or you go for a test drive in a car. I think the same thing could be appropriate for telemedicine. Give away the first visit, you know, put some skin in the game, because I think once people see it, they're really going to like it. And once clinicians get comfortable in that clinical construct, they may become the biggest advocates ever.
And John, just tell me quickly, what are the financial and business implications of telemedicine in the market as you're currently seeing them? You know,
I think that's the most important question to ask, because the marketplace is really a reflection of clinical adoption and utility. So a lot of tech stocks have really been beaten up. And I think there's a whole trend here that's driving it down. But if you look at Teladoc, the Teladoc stock is down 50-60% over 6 months. So we're not seeing the financial support, if you will, that can drive clinical adoption. And I think that's an interesting duality. Another duality is that when you see a stock price going up, when you see Tesla going up, it kind of feeds your interest in buying an electric car. You know, it's a whole complex dynamic, but we're not seeing those stock prices go up as much as I would like to see. So the question is telemedicine a viable clinical option when it's not a viable financial option? And that's a concern that we have to work through.
John, I always love having access to your brain. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, that you'd like to say?
Happy New Year.
It's such a robust topic.
Telemedicine, I think, is the future. It's going to be very important. I find that a lot of the business journals and the papers have been citing telemedicine as going up, but they're using data that's 6 months old. And the problem is, in today's world, particularly around COVID and the changes in COVID, that's changing so quickly that those data are no longer an accurate reflection of the marketplace. So I think that in the final analysis, telemedicine is not at an inflection point. I think that telemedicine is at a tipping point. And it's going to be an interesting time where both technology and human nature together play a role in advancing this important therapeutic modality.
Well said. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.